G'day. This is a video that is, gives you, has a functional purpose, but it is a little bit gratuitous. I do admit that. It's not going to be for everyone. So sorry if it doesn't suit you, but I suppose, this just is something that was a bit indulgent, let's say, but it's not for everybody. This is a little bit of a modification I've done, not a major one, to the Ram over summer. That adds some Cummins mudflaps to my Ram 3500. So one of the things that's really annoyed me, and I live on about 10 k's of dirt to get to my house. One of the things that has really annoyed me since buying this thing is I've had the standard Ram mudflaps, the rubber mudflaps on it, and it just throws dust and mud all over the truck. It's just shocking. The widest part of the fender is way up here, and the mudflaps only just hanging about back under here. So there's all this gap where the tyre stick sits level or just outside of the mud flap, and it throws mud all up the side of the truck to the widest point of the truck, as I said, which is way up here, and just makes a mess. Like with a dark coloured Ram, and all things being equal, I would have chosen a white one, but this is what was available, so I've got a dark red one. All things being equal, I would have put a lighter colour, and so a darker colour is always going to be harder to keep clean anyway. But this thing is just shocking for attracting mud and dust. So I've wanted to add a wider mud flap. Now in Australia, if you're towing a caravan or a race car or any sort of regular towing, one thing that has become quite popular is things called rock tamers. And rock tamers are basically a metal, it's a bit more complicated than this, I'm oversimplifying, I know, but it's basically a big long metal bar with two big black truck mud flaps hanging off it, that basically you put two mud flaps that cover pretty much the whole back of your car and stops your vehicle flicking up stones and mud and water all over whatever it is you're towing. Now, when I was towing building hill climb cars and race cars, we used to tow them around a whole bunch. And on my car trailer, I had a steel front on it, like it wasn't removable. It was a solid piece of steel across it, like a drop side on a ute tray. And that thing just got sandblasted. I had stickers all over the front of it, and it was just got absolutely pummeled. You don't realize how many rocks and bits of debris your tires flick up and throw at whatever's coming behind you. And if that's immediately behind you with a trailer, I basically sandblasted the whole front of that trailer and took it had been powder coated, took over time, over a number of years of towing, took all the powder coating off, the stickers I had on there, tore them all to shreds. It's amazing how much you flick up off your tires, and it's no exception with this ute either. It really does flick up a lot of debris. What I sought to do was I wanted to prevent that, because the front of the car, the driver's side door, the passenger side door is always filthy. All up the side is always filthy. So I put a wider set of mud flaps on it. Now to go wider, you could do this out of just some heavy rubber. In Australia, there's a retailer that's quite well known around the chains called Clark Rubber. Any Clark Rubber should be able to fix you up with that, with a relatively thick piece of rubber that you can cut to design, or you could just get a plain black or white mud flap. But if you're going to do it on a Ram, and you're going to put a big heavy duty mud flap on it, why not put a one that's branded with Cummins on it? In Australia, if you're from a regional area, it's quite common for young people living in regional areas to do their utility vehicles up like a truck. So they'll have a bug flector on the bonnet, or a Mack Bulldog on the bull bar, or big truck mud flaps hanging down from the back or the front of the bull bar. That's something that is, it's not as common perhaps as it once was, but it was done quite commonly. But anyway, I figure if you're going to put a mud flap on a vehicle that has a Cummins, why not get a genuine Cummins mud flap? These are about $70 though, so they're not cheap, but they're very heavy, they're very thick. They're designed to take punishment. They're proper truck mud flaps. You can buy them from a Cummins dealer, and these are the new design. The old ones had a blue trim, and they were blue. These are dark with a separate piece of material with the Cummins logo. adhered to them. You can get small ones made for cars, utes, trailers, but Cummins tells me that they're not available at the moment. The new supplier that's supplying these mud flaps can't do those little car mud flaps, so they're currently out of stock. When they get a new supplier, you could do a similar arrangement like this with a narrow Cummins mud flap. The reason I went as wide as I did, again, it's just to stop all that debris from flicking up principally on the truck itself, but also if I'm towing anything, this is basically the equivalent of having a mud flap that acts like one of these branded rock tamer devices that people hang off the back of their utes. It really just stops all the debris flying off it. And it's worked a treat. So since fitting them, driving on muddy days and on dusty days, this thing is not nearly getting as much mud and dust on it. The mud flaps are doing their job, and it's all staying inside the wheel well, which is where I want it. So I can hose it off, and it's not getting the ute covered in debris or potentially suffering stone chips. I haven't towed with it yet, but I assume that it's going to do its job there. This is well wide enough on the inside, and it's got a good inch on the outside out from the tyre, which, as you can see here, like the fender's in here, but the actual guard goes up here. So to make them, what it's made up, though, that's the mud flap that came from Cummins, fairly straightforward. The top piece you could make out of pretty much anything, but I have bolted it to it, so it does need to be something that's fairly strong, fairly rigid. In this case, I've used what's referred to as ABS. Some people call it hair cell. That's it there. It's got a grain, a black grain on one side. I use this for a lot of different reasons. It's really good to heat and bend. It's very easy to bend. It's very strong. It's rigid, and it's with that lovely grain on it. I find it great for use on interior applications. I've got an upcoming video on my Hilux on retrimming the interior using ABS. The other side is a glossy, smooth finish, which you can also use. So that's what I use. You can get it in various thicknesses. That's 3mm, bought from Transpower Industrial in Wodonga. That's where that came from, where I bought all my ABS from, incidentally. So you just buy it in a big sheet. Sheets are quite large, but I just bought a big sheet of it. It's not particularly cheap. That was probably about $250, $300 for the full sheet, but I didn't use the whole sheet to do the whole thing. I probably only used a quarter of it, although I did make some mistakes. So to do it, what I did was getting the standard mud flap and then made up a template. And that's my template. So I took the mud flap off and drove down a dirt road that had some mud on it, and then I saw where the tyre flicked the mud, and I went, well, I don't want any of the mud or rock or whatever. That's where the ute is going to throw debris, and I don't want my fenders getting any debris on them. So it went all the way back to here, which is over the halfway point of the wheel arch, both on the front and the rear. So I got the mud flap, and I've made up a template, which just kind of sat in there and got me the length I needed, so I could see how tall it needed to be. I actually cut down here, so it's all in sections because I added it piece by piece. But and this has got a piece extra added for the rear of the ute, which I didn't use. I extended it. It's not as wide as this at the front. And it didn't have to go around the inner guard goes further back on the front. The inner guard has to come around the rear leaf spring, so the inner guard at the back of the car is narrower than the front, so I had to go around it, go down and back up underneath it at the back, whereas I didn't need to do that at the front. So that's an extra little piece I had to do, modifying my template. But basically built around the original mud flap design, taken out, that's the additional thickness, that piece there. That's how wider on the outside it is from the standard one. And then I went all the way in as far as I possibly could before I fouled on anything on the back leaf spring on the front. That'd be your control arms. So when these have been trimmed down. These have had probably about an inch taken off either side because I just couldn't accommodate the full mud flap unless I dropped it down, and then I'd have to trim the bottom off. And I wanted to keep the length that I have, so I just trimmed an inch off from either side. But made a template to sit where I wanted. Lots of modification, lots of trimming. I've got about 3 of these lying around, but this is pretty much the final one that I had. Sat in there, adjust it where you need to, make sure that the mud flaps lay square. Use that template and trace on the ABS. The good news is once you've made it, like even with the exhaust is on the other side of the car and sticks out just about here. Even with the exhaust, I was able to use the same template on both sides. So just map that out on the ABS and then turn it around and cut it again. The reason you have to turn it around if you use this is it's got that grain on it, and I quite like the grain on the outside. It's a smooth finish on the inside. Just like the look of it, it might not be for you, but you've got to flip it over so you've not got the template when you do it. Trace it, flip it over, trace it again, so that you've got two mud flaps with the grain on the right side. If you choose to do it my way, if you choose choose to use this as a piece of rubber, and the reason I didn't use rubber is the rubber's going to have to be pretty thick to hold the weight of this mud flap up. The mud flap's quite heavy, so I needed something pretty strong. I've got a bit of steel along the inside here, reinforcing this. So that's a template. That's actually an attempt, but I stuffed it up. There's too many holes in it. I measure twice, cut once. Well, that's what happens when you measure once and you don't get your holes in the right spot. And because I'm a perfectionist, I didn't want holes everywhere on my mud flap, so it ended up in the scrap pile. But anyway, never mind. But yeah, that's one from the front of the car. Actually, the back one's a little bit different to that, but that's the front of the car. So you just cut with a jigsaw with a metal blade. Very, very simple. It cuts like through it like a hot knife through butter. Not hard to cut. Nice and strong. And this is done about circa about 1,200, probably a bit more than that now. Might be around 1,500 K since I fitted them. All looks good. Everything's sitting there right. Heavy bolts holding it in place. A few extra screws into the quarter panel to hold it on than what's standard, but otherwise it's just the standard mounting location, and it's going well so far. So again, a bit gratuitous having the Cummins logo on there, but it's got a Cummins, so why the heck not have a Cummins logo on your mud flap if you can have it. Pretty simple, just lots of templates. So when I did this, I even had drilled holes in it so that you could mount it, sit back from it, trial fit your mud flap. Yep, that looks fine. That's sitting where I want it. Or no, it's not. Take it away. Drill another hole in your template. Stick it up there. Yep, no, that's where I want it. Trial. And then square it off. This is just, as I said, just drilled holes in that. They're I think they're M8 bolts, I think, with a washer on the outside and on the inside. Holds it up fine, and is really keeping we're at the moment, we've had a few muddy days, a few bit of rain, and now it's dried out. We've got a lot of dusty days, and the car's it's got dust on it. Sure, it's not as clean as what it should be, but it's not half as dirty as what it used to be with just those standard Ram mud flaps on it. It's a revelation in compared to what it used to be like. It's way better in keeping that dust and debris where I want it to be, rather than all up the back end of the car. So they're nice, strong mud flaps. They'll last a long time. I've had, back when I was a young guy, I had truck mud flaps on the front of my old farm ute and did, probably over 100,000 Ks of them. You mount them well, they last really, really well. But if you wanted, you could do this project a lot cheaper than I did it, just by doing it with some really heavy duty rubber, or get unbranded mud flaps. You won't save a heap, but truck mud flaps that are unbranded, you might save yourself 20 bucks, get them for circa $50 Australian. And you can do all fours with it. But as I said, a bit gratuitous with the Cummins mud flap on it, but that's what that's what I like. So they're the same front and rear, Cummins mud flap brand on the front, same setup on the front, mounted exactly the same way, goes up to the same distance, but it's just mounted at the front. I was able to, on this, I've had to go down and underneath the inner guard because it's narrower, but at the front of the car, the inner guard is longer. It goes all the way into the control arm. So I've just bolted the mud flap on the ABS all the way through that inner guard, all the way into as far as the inner guard goes. But it sits exactly at the same spot, same thickness, from same distance out from the car at the front of the car. sits the same front and rear, although it does sit a little bit higher. The back mud flaps are a little lower than the ones at the front, but you know, and these wear. So if I put a big load on it, or I'm carrying a big load, these are not far off the ground, so these might drag. And in my experience, having dragged a lot of mud flaps with heavy loads, they wear. So these will become shorter over time as they drag. But even with that big thick bottom lip worn off, I've found these truck mud flaps are very, very sturdy, and they'll just wear themselves up over time. And if you wear them down to the point where you want to replace them, I would fully expect this to be fully intact, and you just unbolt them, take it away, put a new mud flap on it, and away you go. So this won't be a modification for everybody. If you're in Australia, you can just get a set of rock tamers, which more or less go on your tow hitch. But as an alternative for that, so you don't have that on your hitch, you could just make yourself a set of mud flaps, widen it out, because they really do, you know, on these utility vehicles driving down Aussie roads, it does pepper whatever you're towing with stones. And if you're worried about the finish of your caravan, or if you're towing a show car, you certainly don't want stone chips from your tow vehicle. So these can be quite a useful addition to protect whatever it is that you're towing, but you don't have to use the Cummins mud flaps. And this sort of application will work on any ute. Doesn't have to be a Ram. You can put, as long as you've got enough room to put the mud flap on the back and go in and around your inner guard or whatever on a tub or on a tray. If you're doing it on a tray, you could just widen a steel tray. You could just widen your rear guards, as long as it doesn't foul on the chassis rails or something. You could do it that way, but in any event, it's pretty adaptable to whatever you're looking to do. So I hope this video was useful for you. This won't be a modification for everyone, but hopefully it's something that at least one of you is interested in. I appreciate you watching. Thank you.